We're glad to be with you, and we look forward to having a really good session today and looking at what's been going on in the country, in particular what's been going on in our state parks. So the last 2 months have seemed like 2 years. What we've experienced this spring was unimaginable just 6 months ago. If we would have had this conversation back at our national meeting in Arkansas and someone would have got up and said, here's what could happen, my guess is that the majority of us would say, no, this country will never shut down. We will not cancel sports, conferences, schools. It was just unimaginable. As the coronavirus spread across the nation, park systems responded to this unprecedented event. And we responded differently, and we managed through this process and this crisis differently. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about that and learn from each other and ask questions and find ways to move forward. Park closures, new guidelines, we've got a lot to cover. So let's get started. What I like to do now is turn it over to Louis Ledford, retired director from North Carolina and the executive director of the National Association of State Park Directors. Louis will guide us through some of the things that's happened in the country during the last couple of months. Louis?
Thank you, Phil, and thank you, Clemson and Shauna and everybody that's put all this together. And wow, what a great group it has. You said 250 folks had joined this webinar. Our record participation was 133 previously. So we have a lot of folks interested, and we have a lot of distinguished folks on the call. In addition to a number of state park directors, we've got leadership from the National Park Service. We've got federal, provincial, and territorial leaders for parks and our friends in Canada. We've got agency directors and folks serving in the governor's cabinets. We've got many of our state park leadership school students, and frankly, just the true leadership of North America in terms of its park systems. Another key group that we have with us, and several were able to register, and we gave them a relatively short notice. And first, let me say thank you to Bill Bryan and to USC Direct. It was through a survey and a kind of a call he had last week that we decided we needed to have this kind of a virtual roundtable and conversation among the directors and park leaders. And so we invited all of our, so many of our vendors and reservation specialist companies, if you will. They have a true stake in this as well. I mean, if you think what's happened, and as we all know about the reservation systems and the cancellations and so forth and so on, they truly, truly have been impacted as well. You know, speaking of impacts, if you think that 3 months ago, we were soon to be told 300 million people would be told to shelter in place, that this time last year, we were less than 80%, more than 80% of the airlines are vacant compared to what they were last year. And it certainly impacted the park systems as well. Bill, you moving it, there we go. Of course, I want to put this out about Canada. If you look at all the different websites around all the provinces and the federal areas, it's the similar everywhere. And we're just so impacted in the closures that's been resulting from this coronavirus disease. And we've all been trying to do our parts. You know, parks people are one of the most resourceful groups out there. You know, they fell in line, they tried to achieve the same goal that so many of the guidelines were coming out of CDC and other places. There are a number of different approaches, but they all had that same goal. And I think it's really been incredible on the amount of budgets and staffing and all the anxieties and fear and impacts that we've been accomplishing as much as we have as a park system. You know, many of us will remember a few weeks ago when out in Washington State, we started hearing about this and what was happening out there. In fact, before that, I was on a panel in NC State with a dean selection committee, and they were talking about this virus in Canada, and a guy from the vet school there was telling us, oh, this is probably not going to spread to North America. But soon we started hearing about what was happening in Washington. And then suddenly things started closing down around our country. All these venues and facilities and ballparks and different things were closing. And suddenly the parks are just getting inundated. I mean, you can see these South Carolina photos in Pennsylvania or Florida, how it's just overwhelming the park systems. And what do? You can see, like in North Carolina, they were closing gates and folks were still walking in. There were no stopping them. It was just incredible. In fact, one way I've heard it described is we probably have more demand and more appreciation for America's state parks than we've ever had. Look what it was going on in Florida, what was going on in Arkansas and Oregon, just incredible. And you can see the signs there on the right of Florida where they were putting up signs and talking about social distancing and trying to accomplish and protect the health and safety of the visitors as well as the staff. Yes, social distancing, that's a common word that we have in our vernacular now, but wow, there's not many places in parks that don't have these spur trails or these walkways like you see there in Watkins Glens, New York, or in Karstner Caverns in Arizona, or like I think this one on the right is from Washington State, where there are these single tread or single track trails. And oftentimes a spur trail that you got to go back and come back the same way. It's so hard in times in some of the parks and just frankly impossible to provide the safe social distancing that was being recommended. So many of the states started trying to do all these things. It really impressed me on a call I had with Grady and the Arkansas team, how much work was being done, and the videos and the posters and all the information in the effort that Indiana and other states were doing to sanitize and keep their restrooms clean. But if you think about what the public was experiencing, there was this anxiety and fear of even going into the restrooms, wondering if it was clean. And so frankly, a lot of debris and paper and stuff was being left in the parks. You can see Kansas put up shields in their contact stations. And I think that photo on the right is a contact station in Florida where you can see the protective devices as they're trying to control the spread of COVID there. So then a decision started being made, and very respectful of all the states, but they started having to make these decisions. What can we do? Is the impact to the point where we've got to start closing? And some of the ones in the Northwest started closing. You could see that what was happening in Oregon and then what happened looked like after the closure. McKinney Falls, one of the famous parks in Texas, closed. And then there in New Mexico, you can see they're trying to socially distance, and then they were one of the early ones that decided they needed to close the park system. This is a map from April 15th, and I use this map, and special thanks to Ken Sliwa in Arizona and also to Jeff King in Arkansas. They have done tremendous work as far as trying to keep things updated and sharing with each other on our Slack communication tool and others. But this was, I think I'm correct, this was the worst day as far as the closed parks in America. All those in black being totally closed as a park system. Those in red only had overnight accommodation in some parks. Many of those in red had their entire parks closed, multiple parks closed, but had a few park areas where there was some access. And there was a little bit more restriction there in Utah and Oklahoma. And then you have those in yellow, those 6 states that made an effort and in some way kept some overnight accommodation available for the public. If you think about 230,000 campsites in America, that's a lot of closures and a lot of things that went on to make it where it is today. This next slide will kind of show you a transition of how it kind of started closing. It'll take about 10 seconds here to go through, and then you'll start seeing it, how they start reopening. You can see the colors will start changing, and the additional will turn red with those closures and more black. It's a phenomenon that we've never, ever experienced. As Phil was suggesting earlier, no one would have ever believed that this would have happened in the United States. The national parks were experiencing much of the same things. Most all of the federal recreation areas were experiencing the same things in terms of closures. But then you start seeing these parks now in late April start trying to reopen and get some park facilities back available to the public. As it stands today, Mississippi, if I'm not mistaken, has the only state that's a total system closed right now. I think Oregon was one that opened this week and got some areas back open to the public. It's been quite a challenge for folks. And I was reading a posting that Ron Olson from Michigan had up recently about being questioned about why did it take 5 weeks to open a campground. If you start thinking about having laid folks off and all the training and all the things that are associated with reopening when you don't have the staff in place. I'm certainly speaking to the choir when I say it's a challenge at best. Oh, and I do need to give one more shout out to what all of you, so many of you have done so well. The videos, the social media posting, the resourcefulness, the creativity, all you're doing to try to inform. The video, there's a video referenced there in the upper right. I think the Carolinas and Virginia used a lot of environmental education or general park education, and certainly so many school children were at home, and hopefully many of them picked up and utilized that. There's the YouTube video that you can see from folks in Tennessee where they did a great job of giving tips about parks reopening in Tennessee and being safe. And there's a lot of funny things too. I think there's one there from Missouri about the fear factor. So everybody's been trying to move forward and trying to do it in a very positive way. Phil, move ahead. We're trying to welcome people back, but we're trying to do it with the right methodologies, the social distancing, the certain restrictions on certain access on certain trails, face coverings, trying to do what's necessary to meet the guidelines and the best policies that we know. And you know how everything's been changing. Everything has been changing. How many policy changes have never been in place before that you've had to write or that you've had to implement, or elected officials that maybe didn't understand your processes were enforcing you to do? It's been challenging, to say the least, for these essential workers, as I call them. There's no more essential folks, and what great work they've done in the last few weeks. Of course, the media's had their fun with it too. So what are you in for? Hiking in a state park. And they're telling us to socially distance and all those things. It's been a challenge, but if there's any group up for it, I think, we know the state parks folks are, but that doesn't make it any less easier. Dan Bordner shared with me last week when he made the comment about closing all the weddings that were scheduled for the month of May in Indiana. And so oftentimes we talk about those 150 lodges and those hundreds of cabins, and those 230,000 campsites that I referenced earlier in American state parks. And that's where the revenue comes from, in addition to the gates and the parking fees and so forth. But just think, Dan explained that there was $72,000 of net revenue lost just in the state of Indiana park system when he canceled those May weddings. That's not to say anything about the impact that's going on across the country with those folks, those nuptials and all the families and all the providers and so forth. So it's really been challenging, but we're all looking forward to getting people back out into groups and in parks, having these great outdoor recreation experiences, but also doing what so many of us love to do, to protect and conserve these iconic natural resources. We've had a phrase we say so often: it's all about the resource, it's all about the people. And we're looking forward to returning to whatever that new normal is, Phil. So thank you for an opportunity to do a brief introduction, and look forward to hearing more from the panelists, as we have at least 12 state park directors to share some of their experience as well as insights as we start to move forward. As I've said to several folks recently, we're one day closer to being through this experience and this health crisis and this fiscal challenge. Thank you, Phil.
Thank you, Louis. It is indeed, the last 2 months we've learned a lot, and it seems like 2 years. But one of the things that we'll take out of this is that we will have learned a lot, and we'll be better prepared. Hopefully not for anything like this again, but for other emergencies that will happen in the next 12 months or maybe the next 6 months. So what we've done is we've broken it down to 4 different panels, and we have park directors that represent each one of these different topics, and we'll have some conversations and we'll go from there. One of the things that I think is interesting that we'll discover in this webinar is what we've always known. It's very rare that you find 50 states that can agree on anything. But I think in our park system, one of the things that we did it differently, and everyone kind of did it differently because this was a brand new phenomenon that we had never managed through before. So there's different approaches to how we have met this challenge. But I think the critical part of this is we all had one goal in mind. Every park system had the same end goal in mind, and that was to put people back in parks. Our methods are a little bit different based on what our resources are and our philosophies and our politics are. But the goal that everybody wants to do is put people back in parks. So we'll start out at the very beginning of how people looked at whether you opened, stayed open, or you closed, and what level of closure did you take. And I'll ask Linda Lanterman, the director of Kansas and former president of NASPD, to kind of talk about that and lead that discussion and introduce your panel, Linda, and y'all have some discussions about the opening versus closing and what levels and how different states accomplish that. Linda?
Yep. Thank you, Phil. And thank you for the overview, Louis. That was very good and very enlightening. So my team today is Christy Tafoya at New Mexico State Parks, Lisa Sumption with Oregon State Parks, and Greg Line with Alabama State Parks. And so Greg and I, our two systems, we stayed open, and we're going to get a perspective from us that kept our system open, and then the other two. And real quick, I'm going to say for Kansas, when this came out in early March, it was still pretty cold here. And so our visitation wasn't as high as many of you other ones that have shown those pictures. And even through the first couple weeks of April, it was still cold and we didn't have the traffic. As a matter of fact, what happened to us in March is we did $500,000 in refunds, just people not wanting to come into our state parks. And if you recall, in Kansas last year, we were devastated by the flooding. And so we were already on the brink of losing our cash flow. So we tried to monitor the situation. We made some changes in our cleaning and went with the CDC on cleaning guidelines and with our Kansas Department of Health and Environment. And so we've had equipment for our staff to clean. And so those were the ways that we decided to change. However, in the last couple of weeks of April, it changed and our traffic started to pick up. And as a matter of fact, the revenue we lost in March, we gained back in April and then some of people trying to make reservations to get in. It was crowded this last weekend, and this weekend it is. We are making sure and in trying to enforce social distancing. When the cars are piled up, it looks like there's a lot of people there, but what we're finding out, they're staying in their own campsites pretty close. We closed our beaches and we closed our playgrounds, and we do have some cabins closed. But for the most part, people are staying in their campgrounds. They are at their campsite. They are using our boat ramps and fishing, and our fishing license sales are up significantly also. And what we're also finding is new users. So the Corps of Engineers shut their campgrounds. We're seeing new users come in our state park system that maybe hasn't been there before. Next, I'm going to go to Greg Line out of Alabama. Greg, I'll let you speak now.
Good afternoon, and War Eagle. Like Linda in Kansas, Alabama stayed open. For us, we were essentially responding to our public health director's orders for what would be closed and what would not be closed. And the park system was recognized as an essential public service in that process. So we were allowed to stay open, but then we had to work through a process to determine which of our facilities and which of our amenities were in conflict with the public health director's orders relative to group size and the 6-foot spacing rule. So initially we were under the 25-person rule, and then that eventually transitioned to 10 or more was a prohibited group size. And once we came under that, the biggest impact in our system was how that impacted our lodges and the related lodge business. And that would be weddings, family reunions, and conference business. And so we contacted those guests who had scheduled events in the parks and asked them how they were going to comply with the public health director's orders for group size and spacing. And almost in every instance, those guests canceled their events. So we never closed our lodges, but there's virtually no lodge business taking place at this time. And the business in the restaurants became so slow that we eventually just closed the restaurants again to manage our funds and be responsible with our money. Alabama is a user-pay system. We do not get any operational funds from our general funds. So our strategies were very much driven by making payroll. And in that process, we did go through a reduction in force with our seasonal and hourly employees. We let about 30% of those staff go. And, you know, for us, this happened in a very busy time of the year. This was the peak period for spring break business in Alabama. It was warm. There was a lot of visitation. There was a lot of visitation from neighboring states. And so, you know, initially the business remained high. And then as neighboring states came under closure orders, those customers couldn't travel from the neighboring states to Alabama. And we saw a slowdown in early April, even in our campground business. Today, everything has sort of rebounded. We're seeing record business from a day use standpoint and also from a campground standpoint. I would say our cabins it varies from one location to another, but they're about normal. And again, our lodge business is extremely slow to non-existent. Some of the other elements of what we've done, we've had to close our caves where there really wasn't any specific guidance on how to do that. We just felt like it violated the social distancing principles. And so we suspended the cave tours in our 2 cave parks, but left the parks and the campgrounds open. We have followed all along CDC guidelines for our employees to keep them safe. And lastly, I would say that we were really excited about how our interpretive staff rose to this occasion. They developed some online programs and basically a campaign that if you couldn't come to the park, we would bring the park to you. And I know a number of states did that and did it very successfully. So that was definitely an hour of honor for our interpreters and our park system.
Good job, Greg. Same way with us. Your staff, we couldn't do it without our staff, and our team really came forward with some great ideas. And I think one of those pictures was how we put up plexiglass as a barrier. So next will be Christy Tafoya out of New Mexico. Christy.
Good afternoon, everyone from sunny New Mexico. Hope you're all doing well. It's been wonderful to interface with you all and through Slack and learn about what's going on with you. Today, from my team, I have Toby Velasquez, who's our Deputy Director, and Dennis Vasquez, who's our Field Operations Bureau Chief. We actually have been in a lot of close communication with our governor's office. Our governor has been working very hard to prevent community spread. She has been working very hard to communicate with our citizens and also our state park system. She has been very proactive in messaging out how things are happening with our state parks. We actually did go into a full closure. We started on March 13th, where we suspended camping due to ban on mass gatherings. And that quickly morphed into full closures. So on March 16th, we went into a full closure mode. At that time, we were refunding reservations and trying to communicate with our visitors and ensuring that our staff were working really hard to educate our visitors and to kind of work from the enforcement side of things as well. it was very challenging, I have to say, in terms of the reservation side of things too, and messaging this out. And we were kind of working through kind of almost 2-week phased approaches through this. But I think that, you know, all in all, we had a lot of really good compliance. It seemed like a lot of folks were really understanding about our closures. And then, of course, you did have some folks that were really concerned and upset. I do agree that there's so much love for our state parks out there. And I think that people are really craving being connected to the outdoors and feeling human. You know, I think that that's a really big piece of this. We did start a phased reopening on May 1st. Right now we have 8 state parks that are open, and they're open to day use but very limited facilities. We're using a risk assessment form where we're really evaluating each one of our parks in terms of their visitation, the potentials for community spread, the potentials for personal contact in these parks, and we're kind of pushing this information together to make the best choices that we can to work with our governor's office to open up more parks. But we're evaluating that very carefully. I will tell you that the northwestern part of New Mexico, the Navajo Nation, is very heavily impacted by this. And so we've closed many of our parks in the northwestern part of the state, and that's been really tragic and seeing that happen. And so we've just been very sensitive to these communities that are having these issues. I think there's a couple of things that have come out of this that are, I wanted to share with you. One, we're moving more online. I think a number of our states are doing that in terms of payments. We're making sure that we can streamline. So, I mean, this is kind of the necessity of invention, and we're working very hard with regard to that. I agree, our interpreters have really stepped up, and we have the Heart of a Ranger series that we've been putting out, and we've had some great feedback with videos and hands-on activities, and, you know, really trying to reach our visitors and make them feel still welcome in our parks. And the slide that you see too with the Girl Scouts Love State Parks, we're still working through that whole process. Lewis and I visited with Girl Scouts of the USA, and they're very interested in continuing this partnership. Many of our youth camps are being closed for the summer, so perhaps there's ways for us to welcome Girl Scouts and other youth into our park systems. And we're still moving for that September 12th, 13th date for Girl Scouts Love State Parks. I think we're going to be doing pieces of this a little bit more virtually in some respects, and we're asking that all of our states perhaps put together a nice video to welcome our visitors and our Girl Scouts back into our park fold. So that's what I have today. It's so wonderful to see everybody's faces.
It is, isn't it? Thank you, Christy. And Lisa out of Oregon. Lisa Assumption, will you go next?
Okay, I think I'm unmuted. Good morning, everybody, or afternoon for you guys. Can you hear me okay?
You bet.
Okay, thanks for putting all this together, and it's so nice to see everybody's faces and hear how we were very common but very different in our approaches, even as we move forward. So it's nice to learn and hear how this is working for everybody else. So in Oregon, we were a bit unique. Usually in March around spring, it's raining like crazy here, anybody who's been to the Pacific Northwest, but we had some of the best weather, and it was really 75 degrees on that fateful spring break weekend for us, and they knew it was coming. And so that last weekend, it was like their last hurrah, and they went out and they flooded our beaches and our parks. And they knew that Monday morning, probably they weren't going to be able to get back out. So they made the best of it, which really interesting place because our parks are primarily 5 counties on the North Oregon hold a public meeting where they took action to kick out anybody who did not live there. So all non-residents had to be out in less than 48 hours, which put our team in a place that we had to shut down the entire coastal system for us, which is a really big deal. To get one campground, just to give you perspective, holds 6,000 people. That community has 3,800 total population. And so the team stepped up to the challenge. We got folks out of there as quickly as we can. Those visitors, when they showed up, they were doing things like buying toilet paper and wiping out the grocery stores in this rural community and then posting on Facebook, look, we found it in, this little town in Oregon, which didn't bode well with the community. So the big deal for us was at that time we had to put our mission aside and talk about public safety, because we knew if we closed just the beaches and we opened everything out, left everything else open, they would just move from one rural community to another. So we had to make the tough decision to say public health is more important, and we closed the entire system. So that was interesting. So as we continue to think about moving forward, which as of yesterday I'm happy to report that we have started reopening some of our day use parks, with the understanding that we will not open up any recreation activity in any community that has not met the readiness or is giving us a green light to reopen. That north and communities have been very willing to better social distance and be more responsible around recreation, because they know that the threat of closing is imminent and could be real again. So it was hard on the team. I will say that we have a very, very, very skeleton crew now, like I'm sure everyone else does. So trying to think about reopening with all these new ways of doing business and the changes that are there is a bit of a challenge, but you all know this better than anybody. Parkies rise up like no other, and they're standing up and ready to go. So we're excited to be talking about moving forward, but also worried about things like, do we have enough staff? We don't want to contract or spread the disease. And PPE is another thing that's really kind of on our minds that I haven't heard anybody else mention. So I just want to throw that out there, because as everything else starts reopening, that surge on that demand of the supplies is going to get tight again. So that's what I have to share, and I can't wait to hear some of the other conversations. Thanks for pulling this together, Phil.
Yep.
Louis, Linda.
Thank you, Lisa and team. So as you'll see, it was based on our own state's decisions to open and close, and of course, those decisions are based on your local communities and how the people react to people in their small communities or around your state park systems. And so we all had our own reasons. We don't ever know if it's right, but in the scheme of things, I think with our teams, all of our state park people helping our staff, it's turned out okay. So thank you for listening to the opening and closing, and I'll put it back to you, Phil.
Thank you, Linda and team. Very interesting. And I know every state that's listening has their own set of stories of interesting little things that happen of why you closed and why you didn't close certain areas and how you did certain things. And one of the critical things that Lisa talked about was PPE, and I think probably we'll hit on that on this next category that we'll be talking about is park operations and how park operations has changed. And Grady Spann, the director of Arkansas State Parks, is going to kind of lead that discussion with his panel. And Grady, I'll turn it over to you and let you introduce your folks and tell us a little bit about park operations and some of the strategies that are going on with that across the country. Might have to hit your unmute button, Grady.
There we go. My panel is Ray Bevins from Delaware and Terry Coleman from Indiana. And so we're going to share with you a little bit about how park operations were impacted. And I know not everybody is on Zoom where they can see a screen. So I'm going to talk through some of the items that we did. One of the first things that we decided we needed to do was track the data on what is going on. And our governor was very adamant, and I think Greg said it really well, that our governor feels that parks are an essential service to the public. And so he was very adamant about us not closing completely. We did restrict facilities like lodges and restaurants and other things, but we never really closed. So we just started gathering data. We wanted to know, how many people were visiting our parks every single day, how many states were impacting our parks, from what states were people coming. And we also started gathering data on personal protective equipment and how much supply do we actually have on hand, and how long can we maintain cleaning restrooms and facilities and lodge rooms and cabins based on CDC guidelines. And really, I have to say that CDC and their guidelines for cleaning really has changed the way we look at operating now, because that's the expectation of our teams in the field is when we do open up our cabins and lodges coming up May 15th, we're going to be, we need to provide them with the right PPE to do their job safely. And so CDC and the guidelines from them, along with the Arkansas Department of Health, are really directing us on how we reopen or re-engage our users more than anything. So gathering data was really important to us to figure out, just who's coming to see us. And this all hit us right the week of spring break. And so we had this huge spike in day use during the first spring break weekend. And we figured out real quick that we had some trail systems that were incredibly popular that it did not support the idea of social distancing and our ability to enforce that. So we quickly closed our most popular trail systems just to be able to manage the influx of people. Because when all the federal properties closed, Corps of Engineers, NPS, and U.S. Forest Service, everybody came to us. And then when the malls closed and the movie theaters closed and restaurants closed, everybody started coming to us. So the benefit of this, as far as park operations is concerned, is that a lot of new users that we've been trying to reach for years have suddenly discovered all of our state parks. And that's wonderful. But now how do we protect the resource and protect people from people and so forth? And one of the park operations that I decided to go ahead and implement was kind of to go a little heavy-handed on making sure that we enforce parking regulations. We learned that we had to determine what our park capacity is. And the rule we passed was if every designated parking spot is full, you've reached park capacity. And at that point, we closed our parks as far as operations are concerned. And so that has changed the way people visit us. And that's also changed the way we manage our day-to-day parks. We are a free system. You don't have to pay to come into Arkansas State Parks. So a lot of people have discovered us and continue to use us. And then we, as far as park operations, looking at reopening, we had to evaluate how are we going to reopen each facility that's been closed, like visitor centers, museums, exhibits, lodges, cabins, even campsites after we closed those for a bit. And so operationally, we had to determine what could we allow our staff to do in order to still serve the public. We knew that our day use areas would remain open except for those high use trails. But then we started looking at bathhouses and bathrooms, and we didn't have the necessary equipment to keep those cleaned and maintained and still protect our staff. And so we did something that a lot of people, it may be controversial, but we contracted with a porta potty company and put porta johns out and closed all of our restrooms so our staff wouldn't have to deal with it. And the same thing, with our lodges and cabins. We at first, operationally, we decided to leave. We closed our lodges, but then our cabins, we only allowed reservations to occur Friday through Monday. And that way the cabin could stay vacant and for Monday through Thursday when they would clean it on Thursday. We learned that the longer something stays untouched, the weaker the virus becomes. And so that's a way of protecting our staff. And so we're implementing those strategies operationally to be able to continue to serve the public. And part of the strategy that we used operationally was we started looking at how are we going to reopen, and we looked at phases. We went through a phase stage, and I have to say I honored a little bit of what South Carolina did and some other states on their ideas, and we phased it by type of facilities. In other words, all of our overnight facilities, we looked at phasing those in, and that include camping and things like that. So it was just a strategy operationally to determine how many people do we have available to work, to maintain facilities and to still protect staff and people from each other as far as social distancing is concerned. So all those things weighed heavily on how we move forward operationally. And so those are the things that really impacted how we determined our operations. And the other thing, and Lewis mentioned it earlier, is that every single day, Jeff King and Darren Mitchell and all the park staff, when they would gather data, we'd also gather the data nationally. And so we produced that map every single day, along with a spreadsheet that tracked every single one of your states and what you did every single day. And so that allowed us to see trends across the nation. And I shared this with Lewis as often as possible. And that helped us in determining what was the next step in our operation because of what, you know, Texas did, or what Missouri did, or what South Carolina did, or any state in the nation. We really looked at all of your procedures and operations to determine how we would move forward. So that's how Arkansas approached this problem. And I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Ray.
Thanks, Grady. It's so good to see so many of my friends, and our staff here in Delaware has been adapting much like all of your staffs, and very proud of what we've accomplished. Our parks have stayed open through this, but we have made some major changes. On Grady's bathroom theme, we had some challenges we didn't expect. We brought in porta pots and were prepared to move to them at a certain point. We had theft of hand sanitizer, you know, when that became something you couldn't buy in the store. And we really were concerned about our bathrooms and our porta pots being a spot for community spread. We don't have hot water in some of them. Some of them are just pit toilets with no water at all. So we've kept our bathrooms closed, and kind of a side effect of that is while we're seeing these record crowds, we also decided to waive fees. We encourages people to stay less, which gives more room for more people to come. Some of our slower parks, which we kind of call our retirement parks, have now become our busiest parks because people see them as distant and removed, and going to capacity. You could have told me that last year and I would have laughed at you that certain parks would go to capacity. That has certainly been the case. We are going to re-engage our fee season on Friday. We're 65 to 70% self-funded. Our Flowbird machines are key to that strategy. We're not going to be opening fee booths. And then one thing we're really proud of, we've had an assistance pass program for a long time. Anyone on any kind of SNAP, state assistance, SSI, things like that, we've added unemployment to that. So for $10, as opposed to the normal $35 for a Delaware resident, they're going to be able to get an annual pass, and it'll be offered straight through our website and fulfilled. And we're allowing them to show their receipt in their window until it arrives through the mail. So right now our offices are still closed. We've had rangers responding hands-on to people with heart attacks that later turn out to be COVID patients that may or may not even know that they have had COVID. So we are the front lines. We're not in the hospital, but you know, we have to treat everyone as if they have COVID. We've been enforcing quarantine type of stuff, and I know it's a lot to deal with, but really proud of what our staff have put together. Thanks, Grady.
Thank you, Ray. I appreciate that. I'm going to switch it over to Terry from Indiana now.
Thank you, Grady. I've hit my video a couple times and it doesn't seem to be coming up. So with that, I'll just press forward. Good afternoon, everyone. Governor Holcomb in Indiana has also considered us, like you in Arkansas, essential guest services, for which we feel very fortunate. And I'm going to take a little bit of a different spin here with our story today. It's been a really great lesson and experience for us in leadership. As the COVID-19 coronavirus took hold in Indiana, like most states, we began looking for operational health and safety guidelines for staff and guests. And we began by consulting our State Department of Health and IOSHA and the Department of Homeland Security and federal sources like the CDC and even the World Health Organization. I think we were all a little shocked that there was not a ready-made plan or prescription for health and safety out there unless folks are working in the healthcare or emergency services classification. So immediately our senior leadership team and regional managers began working closely with our agency executives, and we cued in quickly on leadership and what that needed to look like to provide not only sound direction, but also a sense of foundation and comfort that our people needed, and frankly, we needed it as well. From the very beginning, Director Bortner talked about this is the time for leaders to lead. So we decided to talk frequently to each other and advocated that our regional managers communicate frequently with property managers, and in turn, property managers communicate with their teams frequently. At kind of every level of leadership, we learned to clearly and frequently demonstrate character, competence, and passion. Those were the things that we've always cued in on and we wanted to continue to cue in on. And if we did that at each level of leadership, that would be imparted to all the levels of our organization to help folks feel more confident. They needed to feel confidence in themselves and also in our ability as a system to move forward and through this challenge together. And importantly, we needed a plan. Every place needed a plan. We needed an overall plan. So plans provide focus and direction, even if those plans need to be frequently modified. We also needed to provide written daily updates to properties, which include directives as plans evolve and change to keep all properties kind of focused and similarly focused and given their own unique circumstances. Through Microsoft Teams, we immediately implemented weekly manager meetings, weekly in-manager meetings, weekly interpreter meetings, and we developed a state park strategy meeting that was set up for 3 times per week, which included our executive leadership, our senior division leadership, regional managers, and our other program leaders. So staff involvement with planning was deemed critical. So for example, our inn and lodge manager teams put together plans for facility closures. They also implemented things like plans to move furnishings from 3 floors of a lodge in preparation for an upcoming construction project. They implemented an intensive cleaning and maintenance plan for all properties. Many of those things were done so that we could keep our staff working. They also developed and implemented a reopening plan that's now being implemented. So our stewardship teams developed some things as well. They implemented a virtual natural and cultural history program that has been a huge hit, like someone mentioned earlier. I cannot believe the quality of programs that they're putting out there to keep our folks engaged with our parks when they can't be there. They've also developed an interpretive center, historic building, and museum operations and reopening plan as well. Our regional managers pulled teams together to develop plans for our aquatic centers, pools, and beaches, that ended up providing for operational decision-making. They developed PPE guidelines by consulting all of those firms that I mentioned earlier. And we looked division-wide at PPE purchasing and warehousing. Several of our field operations staff solicited and then centrally warehoused cleaning and disinfection supplies and PPE for emergency distribution. We also developed a cache of cleaning and disinfection products and developed protocols. And then even one of our property managers led a committee formulated the platform for what is now our division reopening plan. Our opening plan has been approved by our executive leadership and also by the governor's offices and is currently being implemented. For Indiana, at every level of leadership has been key kind of in providing direction and focus in developing and implementing plans and providing kind of a sense of comfort and stability in a very uncertain and challenging time. Our team has and continues to demonstrate, I think, at every level that great character, competence, and passion that we so often see in park systems throughout the nation and certainly for caring for our most special and treasured places in our state, for our guests, and for each other. Thank you, Grady.
Thank you, Terry. Thanks, Ray. And just to kind of wrap it up, one thing that we've learned in Arkansas as far as park operations, we look at this as an opportunity to really change the way we operate our parks to the better. You know, that we can be more efficient in the way we operate parks. We've figured out real quick what is absolutely needed to serve your guests and to make that park experience positive. And then the fact that we now have such a great, diverse stakeholder group that have used all of our parks, we really need to send a message across to all of our new users and the people who have discovered our parks that you are welcome in our parks, that you belong here. And so we are focusing on sending that message out more than anything in the following months. And Terry's right about communications. We have campfire chats on a weekly basis with all of our park staff to keep everybody up to date, and information flow as far as operating a park from my office all the way through the park system is really critical, so people know what's going on, and know what to expect. And one thing that we did was fun. We operationally, Zoom meetings like this are going to be commonplace from now on. People don't have to travel so much, so we created Zoom backgrounds, virtual backgrounds for Zoom meetings. And so if all of you want to download Arkansas State Parks Zoom background, just go to arkansasstateparks.com, digital discoveries. And sorry for the plug there, but I thought that's a pretty darn good idea, and they did a great job there. So I've been noticing some of the texts about staff morale. Our parks staff are just really ready to get back to park business. I was surprised when, not really surprised, but when we opened up our campgrounds to self-contained RVs only, and we 100% occupancy almost across the whole system, our park teams were so excited to get campers back in the campground. So I'm sure you're seeing the same thing. So park operations, I think, has a great opportunity ahead of us to be better than we've ever been before to serve the public. Phil, that's all this panel has right now.
Thanks, Grady. So we're approaching the top of the hour, but we're going to finish this. I think we probably got another 15, 20 minutes maybe to do this. I knew it'd be hard because y'all are a very quiet, shy, and reserved group and don't like to talk. So if you need to break away at the first of the hour, be reminded that we will post this recorded version on our website. But we'll keep going, and we'll stay as long as we got people listening and wanting to talk. And I'm getting some questions on the chat box, and if you'll keep doing those, we'll try to answer those sometime towards the end. Let's go to revenue and fiscal accountability. Dan Bortner, the president of NASPD, director of Indiana State Parks, is going to kind of lead that discussion. And Dan, if you'll get us started and introduce your group.
Thank you so much, Phil. Thank you for all the work that you've done putting this together today. We'll jump right into this, try to get through it as quickly as we can. Revenue and fiscal responsibility. The problems are just beginning, obviously. Want to just introduce our panel real quick. We'll be joined today by Paul McCormick, the director of the state of South Carolina State Parks, and also by Melissa Baker, the director of the Commonwealth of Virginia State Parks. So, kind of where we've been as far as revenue loss in Indiana, our estimated loss through May 31st, because we've canceled a lot of things all the way throughout, is going to be just shy of about $9 million. $6+ million of that is coming from the parks end of the business, mostly through a loss of camping and gate revenue because we haven't opened our gates yet. Nearly $3 million of that come from the losses. A good chunk of that business, obviously overnight stays, but also from the wedding business and the loss of Mother's Day. We're not open for Mother's Day. That is generally a huge day for us. So those things are not going to happen. The challenges that we're going to have coming forward on some of these things especially is going to be the loss of state revenue due to the things that the state has had to do with regard to the virus. We are looking at estimating up to a 20% budget reversion that may be necessary in fiscal year 21. So, it's a step process to the problems. We have the immediate problems on the ground right now of how do we get these things open and try to get some sense of normalcy there, and then trying to come back with, there's the dollar signs, thank you, Phil, of how do you come back from that financially. Indiana is a state that relies for about 80% of our income on money that we generate. When we haven't been charging for us, that hurts. Those states that are out there that are relying solely on tax dollars, the tax revenue isn't going to be nearly as strong. In the state of Indiana, property taxes are usually due in May. They push that off to July. So, thank goodness the state of Indiana has a $2 billion surplus, or we'd be in a world of hurt trying to just open the doors. So the challenges are just beginning financially as we go through these things. Just to kind of give you a feel where we are right now, the current status at Indiana State Parks, all park properties are still day use only. Restrooms are closed, like someone else had already mentioned. I think it might have been Grady, I'm not sure. We're at rental units. The portalets are what we're using for restrooms. That way the staff doesn't have to clean them because we haven't hired most of our staff yet. Gate fees are being waived. We've closed the hazardous trails, the horse trails, the mountain bike trails. No overnight stays in lodging or in camping. Public buildings are closed. No face-to-face interpretive programs are being offered. Now, that having been said, that's where we have been for the last 6 weeks. Our next steps, beginning this weekend, early next week, we're going to begin charging for gate fees and opening up the restrooms. Open or trail usage will begin next week. Public buildings are going to reopen. Overnight stays and campgrounds and lodges aren't going to open until the 24th of May, so we've still got a little bit of time before we see the folks come back there. There's a lot of public pressure going on right now to get those things open before that. There's the governor closed all campgrounds, not just the state of Indiana's campgrounds, but also the privately held campgrounds, the KOAs, et cetera. So obviously there's some pressure coming from that. So whether or not the data will drive that to stay at May 24th, we're not sure, but that's where we stand today. Our goal is to be fully open and fully operational in the areas that we're going to operate by the 4th of July. There's a lot of things still remain to be seen. We're potentially going to recommend that we don't open our outdoor swimming pools and aquatic centers. There's just a lot of things like that that are going to be different this year. So time will tell as we go through this thing. But, obviously it's a challenge, but that's where we're at in Indiana. I'd like to call on Melissa from the Commonwealth of Virginia to kind of tell us what's going on in Virginia. Melissa?
Okay, hello everyone. Thanks for having me today. Like the rest of you, we are dealing with dark times financially. We are approximately 60% revenue funded. And as you guys know, we're also in the absolute worst part of the fiscal year for being able to handle a situation like this. So we entered the situation having a very good revenue year. We were well ahead of our projections. We thought we were in a place where we were making positive gains this year. And of course, in one short week, all of that changed. But thank goodness we were in a place where we were ahead a little bit. Within that week, we were projecting a $6 million budget shortfall. So we went from a few $1,000,000 ahead on revenue to a $6 million gap that we had to close. And so we had to prioritize just the bare essential work, and we furloughed a lot of seasonal staff. So we are currently working with approximately 15% of our seasonal wage staff that we would have at peak season. We wouldn't be quite there yet, but we would have most of them hired by this point, coming this close to Memorial Day. And so we're operating summer level visitation with winter level staffing, and it's been challenging. As you guys know, this happened at the worst part of the year for us. 3 years left in the year. We're ramping up for summer. You guys, as well as us, have bought all your supplies for the season. We all have a big purchase as we're going into ramping up for the summer season. And so most of our expenses had already taken place, with the exception of staffing. And so that left us in a position where staffing was one of the places where we had the ability to reduce. Beyond furloughing our highly valued staff, we had to look for other mechanisms as well. So just furloughing our staff, which was already very, very, very difficult for us, that wasn't enough to close the gap. And before we even did that, we looked at all of our funding sources. And so what that meant for us is that we tipped into some funding sources that were for long-term benefits. So capital development and acquisition money had to be accessed in this. And so what we found is that to close this temporary gap, we've had to make some decisions that are going to have some long-term implications. We know how critical it is to secure money for that critical maintenance and development needs, and spending that money for a short-term financial crisis it was really difficult, but we had to do it to be able to make the books balance. Another thing that we were thinking of as we went through this, we're constantly balancing what is the short-term immediate emergency problem that we're trying to resolve and to deal with the fact that long-term sustainability is our goal. And so we'd already been working toward increased fiscal sustainability by really accounting for our deferred revenue. So one thing that Virginia State Parks was doing before I got here, and that we've been working on since I've been here, is trying to account for deferred revenue, and that we are moving towards spending less of our camping revenues that we get through reservations until the reservation has already taken place. Where we had been focused on that was across fiscal years. Had we not been focusing on that, we would have been in a far more grave situation. As that is, we still have that consideration of the reservations that have not taken place yet and having to cover that cash. So we're thankful that it looks like that we're ramping back up. It looks like that we will be opening our campgrounds and our overnight accommodations prior to the new fiscal year. But if we had to refund all of the reservations that we already had, we would have a bigger hole than what we had. So thankfully, we were already working on that, and we had some of that cushion in place. And we're in a far better position for having done that. But as it is, we have tapped into that long-term money. We're accessing a line of credit. We furloughed staff. We've reduced operations. And now, as we're looking to ramp up, our break-even analysis on the amenities and the opportunities that we're going to offer is really critical to our decision-making. You guys know that parks are a public good, and our value is measured in much more than the revenue that we bring in. But we simply don't have the money to pay for full operations right now. The money's not there. And so more than ever, we have to look at what is the revenue that an amenity or an operation can bring in. And can it pay for itself, and can it help support paying for other operations? And so we're looking at that as we look at the phased approach that our governor has presented to us. So our governor released his phased approach for reopening Virginia this week. And what we are looking at is, first, does the activity fit within those phases? Can we meet the social distancing, the group size guidelines, the travel restrictions within a phase? And if we can fit it within that phase with accommodations to operations, can we financially make it work? And so that's what we're looking at right now. So that means that we will be looking at some of those high revenue generating opportunities this year, and we may not be able to offer some opportunities that are high cost and low revenue in the short term, just so that we can adjust. Because even though the fiscal year is turning over, many people are saying that we should prepare for another wave of this in the fall. And so July 1 brings us a new scenario, and we can start looking at our fiscal picture a little differently. But if there is a wave in the fall, we have to be prepared for that. And so we'll continue to operate conservatively as we go through these phases, so that we don't find ourselves in as bad of a situation again. So in closing for mine, so many of our decisions that we've made have by necessity been focused on revenue and budget. And for us, that's felt a bit cold. None of us went into this work because we want to live on the spreadsheet, right? But what we've tried to do is we've tried to focus on the fact that we are in the forever business. And so the decisions we've made over the past 6 weeks, we know they're going to have ripple effects for years to come. Tapping into that long-term money will, but also the way we go into the next fiscal year, are we on a level playing field? Are we significantly behind? Will that affect next year? Will that affect 3 years in the future? And so we have tried to be very conservative in this and really keep our financial picture in mind. knowing that the sooner we can get up and running again, and the more we pay attention to that, the sooner we'll be able to come to what is more normal operations. Thank you.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you so much, Melissa. Paul, let's jump over to you.
Yeah, absolutely. Just real quick, everything that everybody has offered so far, every state has had so many incredible decisions that they've had to make, and it's been exciting to watch through Slack and social media the way you guys have been handling things and the challenges you've been rising to, and we've faced a lot of the same things. Focusing strictly on our revenue and fiscal sustainability models, when we made the decision to close, we made the decision based mostly on health and safety at the time, knowing that it would have a huge revenue impact. We are 100% operationally self-sufficient in South Carolina. We don't get any state dollars to help with our operations. And as Melissa alluded to, it couldn't happen at a worse time during the fiscal year. We make this last quarter of the year, we make over 30% of our revenue during that time period. The slide you have up on the screen now shows you a little bit of information about our refunds during this period. So from the period of March 9th through the end of April last year, our refunds during that time period totaled about $281,000. During this time, after we closed and we're refunding not only the time period, but the people who are interested in it, our refunds totaled over $3,360,000. We had one day where the refunds, that spike there totaled $450,000, which was more than we did the entire 6-week period the year before. So we knew going into this what the impact was going to be. Refunds were a good way for us to show that and demonstrate that to everybody. It's one of the factors we've been sharing with people when we talk about our revenue situation moving forward. The next slide, Phil, I think I sent to you. Did you put that in there?
I did not.
Okay. The other information that I had in there, and I know there was a lot of information sent in, was our revenue picture. So much like Melissa, we went into this year at a good revenue picture. At the end of March, we were about $2.5 million ahead of where we were in the operating year the year before. As of May 1st, we are $2.5 million behind where we were. So in that 6-week period, we made a swing of over $5 million in our revenue picture. That's the money we used to pay bills. When we closed and knew that that was going to happen, we laid off all of our 96% of our temporary employees. We laid off 331 temporary employees. We worked with them on unemployment. And we knew coming back, all the challenges of bringing them back on were going to be part of this, not only the obvious hiring process, but also how could you afford to bring them back on as you were ramping up operations at a lower level. This past week, as we opened up last Friday, we've seen a resurgence of visitation, which has a lot of people excited in our parks. We are seeing visitors like a lot of you who we perhaps haven't seen before because they had other opportunities. We're doing a lot of things online. Our annual pass sales for the 3 days we first opened totaled close to $80,000 online in annual pass sales. For the same 3-day weekend last year, we were just under $4,000 in annual pass sales. Recognize we did close down that online sales for a month, so there was a little bit of backlog to get it. And we also opened up online admissions for the first time ever, and we had almost $20,000 in individual park admissions paid online that weekend. So we are seeing a lot of visitation. We're also seeing increased interest in camping because the Army Corps of Engineers are shut down. As far as our model going forward, it's going to look a little bit different. We are, by the nature of this, going to have to change the way we do reservations. We're going to have to put in buffers for cleaning, all the things that we talked about. So we're looking at what our potential revenue stream is moving forward and how we're going to work with I guess a smaller ability to generate revenue in the future. Right now, we're working much like Melissa, looking at different pockets of money where we can finish the rest of this year. Because of the timing, General Assembly is not in session, so we're having a challenge, like many of you, getting some General Assembly relief if we were to seek it. So they're going to pass resolutions to move into next year, but we won't have any legislative relief by the time we get into the next fiscal year. So facing all the same challenges, working through them. Appreciate the support of this team. Dan told me I couldn't go any more than 4.5 minutes, so I'm going to finish up right here.
Thank you so much, Paul. Appreciate that. He's efficient as usual. you know, the bottom line to take from this, folks, is that everybody has felt the hit and will continue to feel the hit on this for some time to come, at least through the next fiscal year. You know, and while we can't control the fact that this happened and we've made up part of the ways we respond to it, what we can control is what we do going forward from here. And that's where the focus needs to be on how we take care of things as we go through it. So with that, Phil, we'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Dan. We'll keep going with our next category, and it is moving forward. Moving forward in best practices as we do start to come out of this crisis and hopefully get back to some new sense of normal. And Don Hope from Washington is going to kind of lead this discussion with his team. And Don, I'll turn it over to you to introduce your team and talk a little bit about moving forward.
Good afternoon, everyone. Our panel will be talking about moving forward and some lessons learned. I believe we all have learned something out of this that will make us a better park system in the future. Just got to say, you can imagine 3 minutes for each speaker, and a director no less is very, very challenging. So we'll try to make this as brief as we can. So I'm going to start off by introducing our gold medal Park System Director, Eric Draper, to start us off. So Eric, are you still there?
Yes, I had to unmute, Don. Thank you very much. It's good to be here. I just wasted 30 seconds of my 3 minutes. Anyway, it's good to be here. I'm going to be quick. I do have a presentation, but I think I'll just dispense with that. I see one of our signs is up on the screen here. Our governor announced on Friday that we will be opening 80 of our 175 parks. Since he made that announcement, we were given permission to open them as we could move them, or advance permission to open them as we could. We now have 122 open. We expect that by the end of the day, Saturday, we'll have 135 of our Florida state parks open. A number of ours are down in high impact counties, Miami, Broward County, that's that area. And we expect to keep our parks closed there because of local county issues. Nevertheless, the things that we're facing have to do with keeping our staff safe. I mean, that's the most important thing. Our staff were very much concerned about the initial outbreaks that took place in Florida because of the lack of social distancing. Everyone saw the images of Florida beaches, and we got roundly mocked throughout the country. So we're very, very conscious of trying to move forward and make sure that if anyone gets another photograph of people not exercising social distancing on a Florida beach, at least it's not in one of the 100 miles of Florida beaches that are managed as part of the Florida Park Service. We have engaged in an aggressive safety program. We developed protocol using CDC and EPA guidelines. We initially did that for our restrooms so that we get the restrooms open. We are training 100% of our staff in these new protocol. We have a special PPE that's been distributed for the staff to use. We're requiring both masks and gloves for cleaning. We have extensive signage already established throughout the parks. We're also developing protocol for the concessions. Concessions are a really important part of what Florida parks do. $45 million a year. We have 800 concession employees typically working within the parks at any given time. We rely heavily on the concessions to deliver visitor services. We need to make sure those concessions have each adopted a safety plan that incorporates all of the protocol for cleaning and disinfecting equipment, restaurant equipment, kayaks, canoes, boat tram tours, all that sort of thing. So that's been a very interesting effort. I have to say the concessions have been terrific about cooperating with us and getting those plans written, but we're documenting each and every safety move. And finally, we think that our social distancing is going to be kind of interesting. We've changed the way that we're doing park entry. Rather than collect money cash directly at the gate right now, we're doing what I heard other parks say they're doing, is collecting some money online. That's going slow so far. We have cash boxes instead of giving change. So we're asking people to give exact change. We're putting that on the website and telling them about that. That's going pretty good so far, but it's still a lot of work to install those boxes to collect that money. And then we've got new kind of credit card readers, so the touchless activity. We think that that's going to help to reduce our staff exposure to visitors and help to protect our visitors just in case our staff have a problem. And that is my short presentation.
Well, thank you, Eric. Business as usual, moving forward and new ideas. Let's move on to one of our newest directors, Mike Sutherland from Missouri.
All right, thank you, and glad to be here. And this has been quite a learning experience, that's for sure. I became officially the park director on February 1st, and then became the first park director in Missouri to close visitor centers on March 19th. So it's been challenging. But now as we move out from kind of the peak of things, we've certainly learned a lot. I think that many of the same challenges and experiences that all of you have shared, we've shared as well. And one thing that I have certainly learned is that as we approach any of these topics, it's very much a balance. As many of you alluded to, the revenue issues, but also a balance with safety, balance with our stakeholders and meeting their expectations, and certainly trying to balance that while building trust as well. And so what we're doing is we're getting ready to, we stayed open pretty well for all of our day use. And so we had 4 parks that really just had over visitation that we had to close. Those are opening next week. And but the biggest issue for us, both from stakeholders, from a revenue perspective, and also probably from a safety perspective, is the how we treat our campgrounds. We did close our campgrounds, and that certainly was presented a big challenge. But now we're moving to a point where we're going to reopen them, but we're going to do things differently. We're implementing 100% reservations, which is something new for many of our parks, and also using the 100% reservation platform to also manage occupancy. I think that's an important part for many of our managers. And so, and all the way through this, and kind of building trust and balancing all of those aspects that we have to balance. One thing that we've really done a lot of is moving decisions closer to the facility, moving decisions to where the impact to our visitors and the impact to our staff really happens. And so that certainly means giving a lot of discretion to our facility managers, and those managers giving discretion to many of their staff to make decisions right on the ground. We have taken the approach that those are where the best decisions are made. And what that has done also is helped really among our staff, helped keep trust, sustain trust, and empower them. You know, we talked a lot about, and many of you have talked about, and I know I have felt this very much, is a lack of control because there are so many things happening that are outside of our control. And so what we've done is really tried to, a best practice that we will have going forward is really putting a lot more responsibility, but a lot more discretion and control with our park managers at the park and site level, because that helps them have more confidence, not only in what they're doing, but I think confidence in the leadership of our system. So those are some of the changes that we're making. We can't, and many of the changes that we've worked through have had to happen really quickly. And so we really have depended on our reservation provider, and so they've really been up to the challenge as well. We've asked, you know, sometimes for just very quick turnarounds because these decisions have to be made and changed so quickly, and have appreciated that. And I think those practices will help set us up going forward as well. That's about all I have.
Well, thanks, Mike, and welcome to the Parks family. Don't forget, we're available for phone calls. If you need any help, reach out to any of these directors. We're willing to help you out in any way we can. Well, we're fortunate to have caught our next director between running and bicycling racing. So let's introduce Ron Olson from Michigan.
Hi, everybody. Thanks. I'll go through this quickly here. One of the things that we have done, and in the beginning, we set up a Park and Recreation Division Incident Command Team, which is made up of some of our field staff and some of our veteran leaders, and also a planner to keep organized. They meet every day, and we have a very robust operational plan that we share with our employees every other day. Is set out, and we build on that depending on the executive orders of the governor and the driving forces behind all of that. And that's helped a lot to keep present and also to evolve best practices and what other people are doing and what we've learned. And we can send that out, make it available to anybody that would like that. One thing we're doing along with that to engage with the employees is we call a chat with the chief. So every week we do a Microsoft Teams where we share the highlights of the week, what's going on, and also to answer any and all questions. That's helped a lot with morale and helped a lot with keeping engagement and understanding and the tempo of the employees. And that's worked out very well because we have a lot of people telecommuting, but like a lot of y'all, our operations are very minimal, and day use, camping, and all that sort of thing are curtailed right now. We experienced 102 employees were laid off temporarily for 10 days, but they'll come back on the 10th. And we have 1,300 and some summer workers, short-term workers we call them, that we need to have to run the program. But right now there's a hiring freeze, so our startup plans are highly dependent upon that. We hope that'll get restarted so we can move forward to get operational. Another thing that we've done in helping to go forward is we've collaborated regularly with some of the larger county and regional park systems in Michigan, and we talk every week about what they're doing because they have similar things. They look at what we're doing, and so we're, I think, stronger because of that collaboration. Also, we work with the Michigan Recreation and Park Association to compare and contrast things that are going on with local parks, and we get many of them, and we provide them with some of the inside interpolation of the governor's order, so it helps them create some alignment with the overall big system of recreation and parks in the entire state. Similarly, we're meeting now with the National Park Service and Forest Service to create alignment with a couple of the national parks and Forest Service areas in Michigan. And we're now in alignment. In the beginning, that wasn't so good, and they were kind of chaotic in what they were doing, but now that's smoothing out so that we're in alignment with what they're doing and what we're doing. One of the things in terms of also going forward, and that is the delayed camping and lodging. We are not going to open our full camping modern sites till June 22nd because it's going to take us, we're about 7-8 weeks behind because we couldn't do work in the parks like some of y'all could do. So we were only doing very basic things. So our startup has been delayed, and that's why, but we're going to gradually open up based on the change of orders. What we hope will keep us moving forward after the 15th of May to start our dispersed camping in the open areas first, which really don't have reservations. Those are non-designated sites in the forest, then the rustic campgrounds, and then the moderns will follow. Also, we have harbors that we operate. We're hoping to open all of them on the 10th of June. And one of the clever things that we did, like many of you, revenues, we're so totally dependent on revenue. We had at first 4,000 camp nights up through the April 12th, and then between April 12th and May 15th into June now, June 22nd, which got extended, we had over 100,000 camp nights, which equaled about $3.5 million. We didn't want to just give all refunds for them. So what we did is an incentive program where we said, if you will delay your booking and rebook later in this year, we will give you one free camp or lodging night. And so far over the last couple of weeks, we've implemented that. We have more people that have delayed. So we kept the money in the pot and delayed their camping and rebooked, then they canceled and got refunds. So that idea worked. versus just giving everybody flat refunds. And one of the things that I just would say in closing is that we also have a very robust restart plan with lots of details, many of which have been covered already by the many of you about protocols for cleaning and PPEs. And one example that we're working on and experimenting with starting next week is using foggers systems that are being used in ambulance systems and some other places to sanitize areas using foggers and give the staff another tool to use. So that's it for now. That's kind of a quick thing, but we can make available any of our detailed plans to anybody that would like them.
Thanks, Ron. One of the unfortunate things of going last, everybody has said most of the things. So I'm going to try to touch on just a few things in my notes that we haven't touched upon. I do want to give a plug for Microsoft Teams. Our group used that quite a bit. In fact, we used it yesterday for our commission meeting and it worked successfully. So if you don't have a meeting internet program, grab onto one because it's going to be beneficial in the future. Also, other technology that has been helpful is our 77 pay stations that we have in our parks. We'll be adding more of those. We're also looking at utilizing our cell phone technology more, less cash. Currently, you can buy our daily pass and our annual pass on a cell phone. So we think there's opportunities there to have less cash between employees and visitors. One thing that hasn't been touched upon was authority. Maybe you're all in different positions, but sometimes in a crisis, we may forget who has the authority to make some of the decisions. And sometimes asking forgiveness just doesn't sometimes work. So my suggestion is to understand your authority, the authority of others, and who to contact to have things changed. Just because we're in a crisis doesn't permit us to waive some of the state laws that are in place. So work with your governor to have certain laws temporarily suspended, which may assist you in your operations. A few suspensions that we had the governor assist us with was the Open Public Meeting Act, the Public Records Requests, areas regarding procurement and purchasing, grants, and other special laws that have time periods associated that you may have not even recognized that you had things that you may have been violating. But we went through and worked with our governor to have things change so we were in compliance with the law. It's funny, I have authority to close my parks, but I didn't have the authority to give refunds on annual passes or daily passes. That's the one state statute that they hold closely to them is that annual pass. So we'll be looking in January to see if we can change that and make sure that I have control over all the fees in our park system. One last thing, if you have an attorney general on payroll like we do not be afraid to use them. During this time, you're going to be questioned by concessionaires, the public, and others about your authority. It's better to be safe than sorry. So work with those attorney generals if you have them. We're in constant contact with them. Lastly, now's not the time to forget about your planning, your emergency planning. Conduct your after action meetings now. Talk about your emergency plans, your incident command structure, things that you have learned, and put those in place now for the next coming crisis. We found out that communications was the important focus for us, and we were successful. So I suggest that you might review your protocols in the area of communications. We also have a continuing of operation plan known as the COOP plan. It's applicable to a whole range of potential incidents and occurrences. If anybody wants a copy of that, just send me an email. I'll send you a link of that. I'll give you some ideas of how we plan for future disasters. If this building disappears from an earthquake or a hurricane or tornado, we have stuff in place of what we're going to do next. So those are real quick things to think about. And we appreciate Clemson and Phil, your work and the work of NASPD. And I don't know if we have any time for any questions.
Thank you, Don. We're going to lead into answering a couple of questions that's been going on with the chat, and I'll throw this out. And if anybody has an answer, as they're still coming in, let me know. So a couple of questions. One of the questions that's been around for everybody, and won't answer this yet, but be thinking about this. A lot of questions about morale and how is morale in the park system, and what's some of the creative ideas that you're using to try to increase morale. And I think we've heard some of that with communication and in meetings through technology. So that was one of the questions. But let me ask this one here. There's been a question out about testing and which states are doing testing, not just for the virus, but for the antibodies, and was anybody doing testing? And I think that we heard through that Kansas and North Dakota are doing some testing, and Arkansas is doing taking of the temperature with a little gun between your eyes. But Linda, maybe you talk about what y'all are doing in Kansas with testing.
We are testing as you come in the office, and we've ordered, we've got thermometers in some locations, and we went ahead and ordered thermometers for the rest of the locations. And they self-monitor, so they have to take their temperature before they come in, hand sanitize everything down, and we're keeping track of that.
Okay, thank you. North Dakota, is North Dakota here?
Yeah.
Are y'all doing something similar?
Yeah, we're taking temps of staff as they arrive at the various parks, and then recording that as part of our practices going forward.
Okay. Question just came in, kind of building on what you were talking about, Don, and I think Ron maybe even has said this too, but looking at different ways to collect revenue from a safety standpoint and to social distancing. And someone is asking, is any park system using Venmo or PayPal or some of those kind of programs? If anybody's using like Venmo or PayPal, just kind of speak up and tell us who you are. If not, we'll assume there's something out there that we can explore. Question about volunteers and campground hosts. Anybody like to chime in on what you've done during this with volunteers or campground hosts? Did they go home? Did you keep them? Or are you asking them to do testing or anything special? Anybody want to add into that?
Phil, I'll chime in from Washington. Unfortunately, we immediately stopped our campground hosts because most of our hosts were the 65 and plus over. And in fact, the first case that we had in our system was a campground host. So unfortunately, we did evacuate all our hosts, and we're looking at reopening that program a little bit differently next year.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard a lot of states that did that for that very same reason, because usually your campground hosts are in that vulnerable group. We've taken up a lot of time, and I've asked President Dan if he will kind of wrap things up from a NASPD perspective, and then Dan, if you'll turn it back over to me, we'll wrap things up and tell you what's next.
Thank you so much, Phil. I know everyone's busy right now, so we're going to wrap this up pretty quick. I would like to offer our thanks to Bill Bryan and the good folks at USC Direct for encouraging this dialogue, and of course, Phil Gaines and Shauna Cass from Clemson University. Go Tigers for hosting this today. Thank you to each of the vendors who joined us. We appreciate your support as always. For those who served on the panels, we appreciate your willingness to take time out of busy schedules to put your presentations together. Of course, thank you to the membership of the NASPD and to our Executive Director, Louis Ledford. To say that the past few months have been a challenge would be an understatement. While most of us have experience with some sort of crisis that affects how we do business, you know, Louisiana's had Katrina, Montana and California have wildfires. Here in the Hoosier State, we get to enjoy flooding and tornadoes. But it's safe to say that this one is unique. You know, therefore, there is no template to show us how to lead during times such as this. Each state has had their own way of handling the crisis, and we've certainly seen that there's no one-size-fits-all solution to the issues that we've talked about today. It's my sincere hope that you take away some thoughts or ideas of value based upon what you've heard today. If nothing else, take with you the knowledge that we are indeed in this together. While imaginary lines may separate us, we're all park professionals who feel compelled to get our systems back to operating as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Operations are going to look different, without question, but what remains the same is the support we have for one another. None of us is without a resource to reach out to. You can contact Lewis, you can contact me, any of the NASPD board to assist you with information that you might find useful. And of course, the greatest resource we have is the ability to reach out to each other. So don't be afraid to do that. Just let us know how we can help. Phil, back to you to close us out.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, everyone, for your attention today and your patience as we went through this. It's a lot of stuff to cover, and I think what we've done is really just scratch the surface. So much more to learn, and some of the key points that I was writing down that I heard over and over and over again was safety, that desire for us for service to take care of the people who come to parks through safety, but also through the programs. And, you know, parks aren't parks without people in them. And so as we strive to get back to that, the other word that I heard a lot, or the concept that I heard a lot, was leadership. And so with those things in mind, our world has changed for sure, but with change comes opportunity. We'll have to redefine what carrying capacity means, and we'll have to look at that again. We'll have to redefine what safety means, and lots of procedure items, from reservations to programs and little things that are particular in your state. What we've learned is what we always knew. People love their parks. They really do. And to find a way to capitalize on this is really critical at this time. And what does that take? Leadership is the key. One of the things that if you want to watch leadership lessons, just turn on the TV and watch the various styles of leadership and the thirst for leadership during a crisis. Leadership is key. But as I've said 1,000 times, leadership is hard. It really is, and you gotta count on each other to get through this, and count on your team to get through this. Leadership is hard. Stay focused, stay safe, leave your mark, and I look forward to getting out of this office and getting back in the parks and getting back in the woods. We've got some more webinars on tap. We have one regarding LWCF that we have that we're going to do, and we'll probably do that later on this summer. We wanted to stay relevant and stay focused on what's going on across the nation. With that being said, Clemson University is honored to be a part in partnership with the National Association of State Park Directors. We enjoy having our friends from Canada and other agencies with us today. And Lewis, I'll let you have the last word as we look forward to starting a summer season and trying to get back to normal. And we'll see everybody in the parks.
Hey, thank you, Phil. And very briefly, just a reminder that I think 42 states have participated on Slack. A lot of these policies and guidelines and procedures that folks are talking about are on that Slack intra-communications tool. You mentioned the LWCF set webinar. We'll definitely get notices out to all those that participated today, as well as our usual communications. And then finally, several folks are asking about the national conference that we have the first week in September. We still want to hold that conference. The staff and team in Pennsylvania have done yeoman's work trying to be prepared for it until they got hit with what we all have been hit with. We've talked about it about 10 days ago, and the last decision we made was they think that if they have 90 days where they have the positive go-ahead to do it, we'll make that decision. So sometime early June, we'll make the final decision on our national conference. Some of you may know that NRPA canceled their big annual congress. It's going to be in Orlando. And so there's challenges ahead there, but we'll let you know on that as soon as we can. And again, stay safe, stay healthy, stay positive.
Thanks, everyone. Stay safe. See you in the parks.
Bye.